incredibly scary news. The breaking news of the morning is that we are not yet apparently out of the threat of some sort of nuclear catastrophe. This is not about Russia threatening once again to attack Europe or the US with nuclear weapons. No, this is of the war potentially damaging a nuclear facility. In this case, Chernobyl. We thought that we had gotten past the fears over some sort of containment breach there after the fight multiple days ago. Well, apparently now the Ukrainian government is saying that the electricity has been cut off, the access, the power line to Chernobyl has been damaged. And that is a problem because, as they say, about 20,000 spent fuel assemblies are stored in the spent nuclear fuel storage facility 1. They need constant cooling, which is possible only if there's electricity. If it's not there, the pumps will not cool. As a result, the temperature in the holding pools will increase. After that, evaporation will occur, and that will lead to nuclear discharge. The wind can transfer the radioactive cloud to other regions of Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and Europe. Now, how much of an immediate threat is there of this happening? I don't know. As we've said from the very beginning of this, take with a massive grain of salt any claim being made by a government, including the Ukrainian government. However, the International Atomic Energy Agency says that it's no longer receiving data monitoring systems installed at the plant and other facilities, which could be an indication that the electricity is down. It could be an indication that those systems have been damaged or shut off by the Russians who now control Chernobyl. But in any event, Jordan, on top of all of the other issues that are going on right now, Chernobyl having some sort of containment breach is hardly what we need.
This is awful, and it again underscores just how devastating in so many different ways war is. And you never really see these types of things depicted in pro-military or pro-war propaganda, but this is the real consequence. This is potentially long-term health consequences for people who had nothing to do with this to begin with, who didn't want this, who don't support it. Even in Russia, like there are thousands of protesters routinely being arrested for speaking out against this. This is awful. But again, to go back to why a no-fly zone wouldn't work, this is another example. Attacking or tampering with a nuclear facility like this violates the Geneva Convention, and they just disregarded it. So it's like, this is who we're dealing with. So this is just another example of why they wouldn't, lend any, or they wouldn't obey any no-fly zone or any sort of diplomatic pressure from the West. That's not diplomatic, but this is who we're dealing with. It's repugnant.
Yeah. And look, it's easy to wish that all these situations were super simple in terms of who's a hero, who's a villain, what's the solution. If I propose a potential fix to this, I would like to know exactly what's going to happen and not have to worry about some sort of unforeseen escalation. But these are complicated situations, and what is being done there every day has consequences. This is a reminder of this. I don't know if in 24 hours we'll find out, no, it's okay. It's like the other threat to Chernobyl or to the other nuclear power plant, the biggest one in Europe. There were fears, but it turns out it's going to be okay. We feel an obligation to make sure that you know every step of the way what is happening, and we will of course be watching for this. Although I have a feeling if the containment is breached, you're probably going to find out pretty quickly. But anyway, we need to take this seriously, and we need to at all times have the most responsible, thoughtful experts in charge who are going to be making decisions based on rational, sane calculations of risk, rather than advancing some sort of insane international relations ideology or trying to benefit domestic weapons manufacturing, all of those sorts of things. This is a reminder, if the previous years have not been, that politics does matter and who is in charge matters perhaps even more. One last thing, Jordan, the House has finalized a bill to send aid to Ukraine. They have in fact doubled what was requested by the Biden administration. They will be sending 13.6 billion, or at least the House has approved the sending of 13.6 billion, which I'm sure is going to be very helpful, and I don't begrudge it. And this is not whataboutism. They can spend money when they want to, and they can do it relatively quickly. Don't ever forget it. That's all. Any thoughts, Jordan?
You said it. This is what we see it into anytime there's, a military conflict or a bank needs bailed out, anything that kind of, it goes toward sort of macro geopolitical goals. They got the money, they have the time, it's a priority. But if it affects the working class, it would benefit the working class. All of a sudden, we need to worry about the deficit. We can't do that.
Yeah, 100%. Again, not whataboutism.
No, I think it's good.
I think it's good. I want it to go there. I would also like it to be deducted from the military budget this year, because it's literally advancing the same interests. But no, we never get to talk about that number. Those numbers don't go down. The line always goes up. That's how it works.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.